Hello Canada, welcome back to another edition of the Canadian Citizen Journal. I'm your host, alias the Guy. There's been a lot going on down in the States that is directly linked to the global cabal. And what the Trump administration is doing to crush the New World Order. For a long time, businesses, well, we'll start off with who kind of started to figure out ways to use their power to devalue countries and then profit from them. And that man is George Soros. Now, I will link a video below for you to watch on George Soros. It's from my sister channel. With this whole tariff and a lot of the legislation that Trump has been passing, the entirety of his plan is being hidden from those who are going to be crushed by it. Now, of course, this will be no surprise to my viewers. Brookfield and Carney, the global initiative, the global cabal, is the number one because of what they are partnered with. Behind those shadows is the industrial military complex. Trump wants to end this. And what really got him into politics was the stock market bailout that happened in 2008. He got to see firsthand on how the American taxpayer bailed out banks and investors that were purposely trying to fail the system through loopholes. Carney was placed into power in Canada. Everybody and anybody who knows about the way the industrial military complex works understands this. And a lot of this, because of the Epstein files, is coming to light. Because it shows how, through the leaked files, how all of these different investors, huge, these guys are the filthiest rich. This goes right down to all of them. And it also goes into countries. And how they are used through Epstein, pitted against each other with a few people at the top that were raping in all of these rewards. They use death and destruction to then go in there and look like saviors and reap the rewards of rebuilding this country that was destroyed because of blah blah blah. It's all bullshit. Right now we have a great example of it, and this is one of the main reasons why Trump is dealing with Europe the way he is, and that is Ukraine. Now, I urge you, watch previous episodes. I have direct links to Ukraine. What's going on there, 99% of the people that I talk to, 99.5% of the people, have no idea of the reality of what is going on in that country. And this has been an ongoing problem in Ukraine since the Second World War. And how Europe was purposely using Ukraine to try to start a war in which millions will die. They get to make Russia out to be the enemy, and then go in there with corporations owned by puppets who then get taxpayer money from all of these nations to rebuild it. And in the end, the people of that country lose even more than they did during the war. They lose their resources, they lose their energy, they lose their water, they lose everything. Even the insurance companies. Let's dive in. There's a great, just an amazing podcast. It's called Promethean Updates. These people are on the ball. And a lot of them are either related to, have worked in, or are part of the kind of greatest administrations that have happened throughout America's history.
I'm going to look at how the new national security strategy is in action with Trump's meetings with Zelensky and Netanyahu. How the British are directly deployed to stop the national security strategy, and how Trump's economic revolution led by tariffs is the final blow to the British system. Now, if you're living in the world of binary choices, pro-Israel versus pro-Palestinian, free world versus Putin and the other autocrats, you're missing the tectonic shifts taking place. So you have Mike Pompeo screaming that Trump sold out to Putin. You have a part of the MAGA movement declaring that Trump sold out to Netanyahu, and another part applauding it. And they're all wrong. The truth is in this document, the 2025 National Security Strategy. And this week, Trump used it to clear the board. So let's start with Russia and Ukraine. The British and the EU sent Zelensky to Mar-a-Lago with a mission: demand open-ended security guarantees, NATO membership, and keep the war machine running. They're operating off of Winston Churchill's post-war playbook that says Russia is our permanent enemy. But Trump is operating off his new national security strategy. And here's what it says. It is a core interest of the United States to negotiate an expeditious cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, to prevent unintended escalation or expansion of the war, and reestablish strategic stability with Russia. And then a little later, and to end the perception and prevent the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance. That is what is driving Trump's negotiating position with Zelensky. So how did the empire respond to Trump's refusal to bend? Immediately after the meeting, drones attacked President Putin's residence in Valdai. The Russians were furious, but they called it a slap in the face to Trump. Now ask yourself, was this really just Zelensky going rogue, or was the British hand at work? We're not alone in pointing out that British intelligence plays a bigger role in guiding these drone systems than the Ukrainians do. As the conservative Treehouse blog put it in their coverage of the attack, I suspect the British did it. So this wasn't a military strike. It was a sabotage operation designed to blow up the Trump-Putin peace channel. But Trump and Putin refused to take the bait. They aren't pawns anymore. Here's Trump's response.
President Putin told me about it. Early in the morning, he said he was attacked. It's no good. It's no good. Don't forget, the Tomahawks. I stopped the Tomahawks. I didn't want that. Because we're talking about, it's a delicate period of time. This is not the right time. It's one thing to be offensive, because they were offensive. It's another thing to attack his house. It's not the right time to do any of that, and can't do it. And I learned about it from President Putin today. I was very angry about it.
And Putin's spokesman Ushakov reported that in that conversation with Trump, Vladimir Putin emphasized that the Russian side intends to continue close and productive work with its U.S. partners in searching for ways to achieve peace.
So on that note, this just happened. Listen very carefully to what Vladimir says.
Here is another example. Yesterday at the Savyolovsky railway station, apparently, this requires, of course, additional work on your part. But it is already clear now that apparently it was such a common for today recruitment via the internet. Most likely, yes. They foisted an explosive device on a person and then remotely blew up both him and the intended object of the attack. In this case, employees of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Most likely, Alexander Vasilyevich and I were just discussing this. He didn't even know anything. This is the result of such criminal, careless behavior. By the way, the enemy does not disdain any other means Well, now it has already gone into the media, probably. Their attempts or intentions to use even some kind of nuclear component. They understand probably how this could end. Now our operational information is also going into the media. It should be there today, probably. It already is. I haven't had time to look at anything. We are talking about a possible explosion of our gas systems along the bottom of the Black Sea. These are the so-called Turk Stream and Blue Stream. They just cannot calm down. They do not know what to do to destroy this peaceful process with the attempt at a settlement by diplomatic means. They are doing everything to commit some kind of provocation and break everything that, let's say carefully, has been achieved on this negotiating track. But we will talk about this more in closed session.
Now, all of this has happened since Trump's State of the Union address. He is slowly dismantling this war machine. He is so similar to JFK, it is crazy. Mainstream doesn't want you to know this. Instead, they use his rhetoric, which sometimes it can sound delusional, and sometimes it is. But for the most part, you got to read behind the lines. They have instant connection, Vladimir and Trump. Trump knows what's going on, just like a lot of other great leaders knew. And most of them got either politically ousted from outside interference from the industrial military complex, the world order, or they were eliminated because they knew if that president stayed in that position, which is the most powerful position in the world, it would crush their money-making scheme on the backs of human lives and tax dollars. Let's continue.
Now watch how this same grand strategy explains the panic over the Netanyahu meeting. For decades, the British have used the Mideast as the cockpit of war. They've created Zionism and Islamic fundamentalism to play the superpowers and victim nations against each other. The new national security strategy flips the board over. It accurately states that for a half-century, American foreign policy prioritized the Mideast above all other regions because it was a major energy supplier, and it described it as a prime theater of superpower competition. But the NSS goes on to say those dynamics no longer hold because superpower competition has given way to great power jockeying, in which the United States retains the most enviable position, reinforced by President Trump's successful revitalization of our alliances in the Gulf, with other Arab partners, and with Israel. Catch that? Revitalization of our alliances in the Gulf with other Arab partners and with Israel. Not Israel first, despite what Tucker Carlson thinks. Trump is saying, we're not playing your games any longer. And he is deliberately and quietly removing countries from the grip of the geopoliticians and treating them as independent nations with common interests with the United States, not as pawns or gas stations or triggers for religious prophecy. So in that content, here's what Trump actually told Bibi Netanyahu. You aren't the sheriff anymore. We'll take care of Iran if needed, and a coalition of outside forces will take care of Hamas if needed. Number two, we don't agree on the West Bank, and you're going to have to deal with that. And number three, the United States is working with Syria and with Turkey's Erdogan, whether you like it or not. Trump is taking countries who are run by not-so-nice people, like Syria, like Turkey, and for that matter, Israel, and moving them off Britain's geopolitical chessboard and into the world dominated by Trump's America First policies of sovereignty. This is grand strategy. For the first time since 1945, the United States is acting as a sovereign nation, not as the queen protecting the empire's chessboard. And Trump is knocking the chess pieces off their board one by one. He's replacing permanent war with bilateral business. But I'll tell you who does get it. The elites in London. They know the jig is up and they're desperate to stop it. So the British Empire isn't going to go down without a fight. On December 11th, not too long after Trump released his national security strategy, the British House of Lords was all ready. They held a pearl-clutching session about the NSS and what they had to do about it. First, Lord Beamish happily reported that the U.S. Congress doesn't agree with Trump and his national security strategy.
Last week, the U.S. Congress, on a bipartisan basis, passed the National Defense Authorization Act, which was signed by the President on Thursday night. That act gives a commitment to U.S. troops in Europe, also highlights that it sees Russia as a threat not just to Europe but to the United States, and also gives a commitment to future U.S. Commitment to providing the senior military figure for Secure, the leader of the commander of NATO. Does my noble friend agree that we should be looking at actions rather than some of the wild statements coming from the White House?
Yeah.
Then Lord Lancaster reported that he had just been in the U.S., where he discussed the problem of the national security strategy with members of the U.S. Congress.
I was in Washington, D.C. last week with other members of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and when the national security strategy was discussed with our fellow elected members in the US, their message was clear that NSSs come and go, sometimes they're implemented and sometimes they don't, but we should judge by what Congress passes, and the National Defence Appropriation Act last week delivered an extra £8 billion to European defence and put a floor of some 76,000 troops, US troops in Europe.
Did you hear that? National security strategies come and go. Does that remind you of what we reported last week? How outlets of empire like Chatham House and the Council on Foreign Relations want to outlast the president by bringing his economic and strategic revolution to an end in 2026 or 2028? How they're maintaining their Trojan horses in the Congress and the rest of the political landscape, the rhinos, the never-Trumpers like Mike Pence and the Koch interests? So while too many in the MAGA base are caught up in the fabricated faction fights and secondary issues, or frankly are acting like 5-year-olds demanding headline-grabbing indictments right now, Donald Trump is dismantling a strategic architecture that has been in place since 1945, an architecture that's used the United States as the dumb giant in the British Empire's globalist schemes, and the British know it. But even bigger than Trump's strategic revolution is the economic revolution.
Now, before we get into the economic end of it, you have to understand what happened. Before Trump announced he was going to run for president in the Republican Party, he was considered, like, every single Democrat out there adored him. Oprah, you name it, they just could not get enough of Trump. Once they realized the corruption within their own Democratic Party, because Trump not running for that party, he ran for the Republican Party. Reality kicked in. Now you got to remember, this all ties down to the main reason that he ran, and I've done a lot of reading on this, and my belief, from a lot of other people's opinions, is it was the stock market bailout, the bank bailout in 2008. This is what kind of tore away, and the hierarchies, the people who run the Democratic Party, the green machine, the global cabal, and there are some Republicans that are involved, which are the dissenters that you see. Now, he's got more battles Marjorie and a few of the others that are going on as well. That's internal. I don't have time to go research all of that. The main point is Trump saw how the burdens were put on the American people. Trump is a major historian. The guy is very, very astute when it comes to history. American history, as well as world history, but mostly tying to America. He knows that the only way to stop what's going on, because he's witnessing it firsthand. Now you gotta remember, he is a multi-billionaire invested in the States and around the world. And he is watching his country crumble because of the industrial military complex. And how over the last 25 years, it became this multifaceted spider web of all of these different organizations that just kept pillaging taxpayers' money. And then they started, even through the UN, unelected officials in the UN acting like the EU does to their nations. Canada has signed on to UN declarations. One of the greatest ones that everybody probably knows right now is the DRIPA, which is in BC. These were purposely put in to cause fear, hate, and division and chaos. They were put in with the help of propaganda in order to control the people and ensure that their puppets stay in power. Trump knows this. Let's take a little bit of step back. We're going to do two big step backs in time.
My uncle, John Kennedy, did that. He refused to go to war. So he was surrounded by military-industrial complex, and he learned very early and an intelligence apparatus that he realized early on that the purpose of the CIA and the intelligence apparatus was to create a constant pipeline of new wars for the military-industrial complex. 3 days before he took the oath of office, Eisenhower, who was the outgoing president, gave what is probably the most important speech in American history, which was, where he warned against the military-industrial complex. I was at my uncle's inauguration. I was in Washington that day as a 6-year-old boy. And I was sitting on the stands behind him in front of him during his inauguration. And he understood that. And 2 months later, the military and intelligence came to him and said, we got to invade Cuba. And he was like, I'm not going to Cuba, and I'm not going to let the military. And they said, well, we got all these Cubans trained, and they're going to go attack Castro. And he said, well, we can't, the U.S. government can't be doing that. We can't be attacking. I don't like what Castro's doing down there, but it's not the United States' job to dictate what kind of governments other countries have. And they said, well, as soon as they land, there's going to be a big revolution. Everybody's going to rise up and they're going to overthrow Castro. And he said, well, you can't use the U.S. military. And they ended up bringing those guys over with United Fruit boats. And in the middle of it, in the night, they came to him and said, they're getting wiped out on the beach and you need to send in the military and invade. And he said, we're not going to do it. And he stepped out of that meeting, and he realized they had been lying to him and trying to trick him. And he said, I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. And then, for the next 1,000 days of his presidency, he was at war with his military and intelligence apparatus. They tried to get him to go into Laos. He said no. They tried to get him to go into Vietnam with combat troops. They said that we need 250,000 combat troops. He refused. Everybody around him wanted him to go into Vietnam. He sent 16,000 military advisors. That's fewer people than he sent to get James Meredith into Ole Miss in Jackson, Mississippi, to get one black man into school. He sent fewer in Vietnam. They weren't allowed to fight. Many of them did. They violated the rules of engagement. In October of 1963, he heard that some of his Green Berets had been killed over there. And he said, I want a total casualty list from Vietnam. And his aide came to him and said, 75 Americans have died. And he said, that's too many. And he signed that day a national security order ordering all troops out of Vietnam, U.S. troops. The first 1,000 over the next month, and then the rest by the beginning of 1965. And then a month later, he was killed. So, but what his view was is that he believed that the view of Americans abroad should not be, a soldier with a gun. It should be a Peace Corps volunteer building, wells, and it should be USAID helping poor people, and it should be Alliance for Progress building middle class. And that's what he did. And he started the Kennedy Milk Program, too.
So he knew he was fighting the exact same thing that Trump is fighting today. But it's become a completely different animal. This world order has been, like I said, spiderwebbed. And now there are politicians who were placed within governments. Great example, Canada. Again, previous episodes. Schwab himself said it. They infiltrated Canada, especially through Trudeau. That's Carney. Carney is in the middleman. Now, he's top tier, but he's not the very top. He's not what's being crushed right now by the Epstein files. He's a lower level of that. But he's involved because he was there working for Goldman Sachs and these other banks in money manipulation in order to profit the wealthy as much as possible on the backs of taxpayers. He learned well, and he became so good at it, they started pushing him into countries' banking systems. Now, here in Canada, thank God, he was controlled by the Harper government and Jim Flaherty. Thank you. But when he got to Britain, that was all insider. And while he was there, he was backdoor trading. He was lobbying, and he was already part of the cogs of the industrial military complex. He was using his position of power to influence people, to change policies within government in order to benefit the wealthy on the backs of the taxpayers. Piles and piles of proof. Previous episodes. Listen to Eisenhower's address. This is an incredibly insightful little clip put together by the U.S. National Archives.
I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell.
This speech did not get very much attention. When a new president is coming to power, as John Kennedy was, the spotlight was not on Dwight Eisenhower.
We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions.
There was a feeling at the time that this must have been written by some speechwriter who just sneaked into the speech.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
3 months ago, we got contacted by a family up in Minnesota saying that we have documents from Malcolm Moose. He was responsible in part for drafting the military-industrial complex speech.
These new papers give us written evidence that this was not just some caprice of Eisenhower's or something by some speechwriter.
You see the evolution of his speech from May 1959 to 1961.
And he wanted to give this speech for a long time, 2 years.
Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea.
There was one person in Dwight Eisenhower's life whom he really confided almost everything to, and that was his brother Milton.
There's one particular document where the speechwriters had already drafted their version of the speech, only to see Milton come along and totally revamp what had already been written.
When Milton Eisenhower was taking notes and writing things on the drafts of these speeches, the speechwriters knew that it wasn't Milton talking, it was Ike.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
He would see magazines with advertisements for some new warplane or some bomb, and he got so angry he'd take the magazine and throw it into the fireplace of the Oval Office because he felt that defense spending should not be something that would be encouraged by companies who are seeking commercial gain.
We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
There is an interesting document. It shows that the farewell speech would be made to Congress. But yet, President Eisenhower decided, no, he was going to address the people.
Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
One test of how well a president speaks is how long the speech lives. Here we are 50 years later, we're still talking about this speech.
Now, on Friday noon, I am to become a private citizen. I am proud to do so. I look forward to it. Thank you, and good night.
So what has Trump done? He said to the military-industrial complex, you're not going to profit. We're going to put limits until you prove otherwise. In other words, come through with the monies that have been given to you with those products, or no funding. He's also taken NATO, and he's removed himself from Ukraine. Now, if you want to sit there and antagonize the bear, if you want to try and get World War III so that all of your buddies can profit off of it, you got to pay for the products themselves. The United States isn't doing it. What else did he do? He's initiated talks because he knows exactly what's going on in Ukraine. It is all a big black flag. The entire war was instigated and provoked by the military-industrial complex. Europe, they want a war. They need it. Why? They have ran their countries into the ground. They are all in huge debt. Unbelievable unemployment. Energy prices, they're living, well, what Canada's going through and what Carney is trying to finish what Trudeau was put here to do. And the media is purposely lying to you. And we're going to get to that in a little wee bit. This is way bigger than just, oh, he's going to attack Canada. He's not going to attack Canada. He's forcing Canada to either crap or get off the pot. And while he's doing that, he's systematically pushing chess pieces off of the table and exposing the global cabal. He started it with the Epstein papers. That went straight to the top. We are seeing it happen in real time. Yes, what happened to the girls and the kids and all that, it is horrible. And yes, we need to see justice on that. And I'm really PO'd that he didn't open all of that up. But in the same aspect, I understand that if he would have, it would have taken away the highest part, which is the global new world order that needed to be exposed for what they're doing and the lives that are being lost because of it. And it all comes down to taxpayers. You and I are paying for all of this disastrous policy around the world, all of these wars, all of these injustices. Canada's been funding Hamas for 10 years straight. We are our own worst enemy. And instead of Canadians seeing that, because all legacy media is now owned by the global elite through Carney and the Liberal Party, you will never see it. They're going to do nothing but gaslight to try to keep Carney in power. That is their number one job. They don't care about you. Carney doesn't care about you. It's all about profit. Profit from death, profit from poverty, profit from fear, hate, and division, and chaos.
Yesterday, President Trump responded to the Supreme Court's tariff decision with a statement that cut through all the legal noise.
It's my opinion that the court has been swayed by foreign interests and a political movement that is far smaller than people would ever think.
Foreign interests behind the Supreme Court. That's a serious charge, and most of the coverage will stop there. They'll obsess over who the president was angry at, Gorsuch, Roberts, or they will only focus on China, an obvious target. But if that's as far as you go, you've missed the point entirely. Take a step back and hold the president's statement up against the other major event this week, Thursday's historic Board of Peace meeting, where 60 nations answered President Trump's call to build something new, and where the president made a not-so-offhand remark about Henry Kissinger.
We had some...
Now, who's not on this Board of Peace is crucial. The instigators. The instigators. Where's Canada? Where's Carney? Where's Macron? Where's Starmer? It's the people that showed up that prove that this whole administration is trying to stop war. Instead, let's build bridges. Yes, peace through strength. But let's do it with peace first. And no more of this big separation between the wealthy and the poor. Let's get each one of these countries to become profitable within their own nation. A sense of national pride and unity. Through that, they will then become part of this American idea, which allows them to tie themselves together.
Conflicts, to put it mildly, in the world. And I said, Steve, how would you like to be Henry Kissinger Jr. that doesn't leak?
Because when you put those two things together, a very specific picture emerges. Not a president venting about a court ruling, but of a president who understands exactly what he's fighting, and he's naming it out loud. I'm Susan Kokinda. Those foreign interests? Well, I've tracked them for decades. They are the same forces we fought the American Revolution against, and for most of those decades, they've stayed hidden. So who are these foreign interests? The president was careful. He said China-centric forces were behind the lawsuits. That is, people who, quote, have business in China and want to keep ripping us off. But look who actually filed the friend of the court briefs against the president's tariff authority. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Cato Institute. These are not Chinese communist front groups. These are the most venerable bastions of Adam Smith's free trade ideology, an ideology which opened the floodgates for cheap Chinese goods to wipe out our manufacturing and to hollow out our middle class for decades. So it's not really China, is it? Now listen to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent speaking to the Dallas Economic Club shortly after the court released its tariff decision. And Bessent went out of his way to say that he had not changed one word of his speech in reaction to the decision. Why? Because this administration did not need a flawed court decision to tell them who the enemy is.
Economic security is the foundation that allows a country to fulfill its most basic obligation of safeguarding its people. Unfortunately, past administrations lost sight of this fundamental truth. allowing faux efficiency gains and short-sighted profit obsession to eclipse security resilience and long-term value.
Fake efficiency gains, short-sighted profit obsession. That's not a description of Chinese policy. That's a description of the British liberal free trade system, the system that measures everything by how much money can be extracted from a nation and its people, leaving an economic wasteland and shattered lives behind.
Boom! There it is. How you doing, Canada? What's happening in your nation?
But what was the fundamental truth that past administrations had abandoned? Here's what Secretary Bessent said.
From the earliest days of the Republic, our founding fathers understood that independence required economic security. The ability to produce essential goods, sustain public credit, and foster domestic industry was seen as the foundation of sovereignty by Alexander Hamilton. And it still is.
Did you catch that? Our Treasury Secretary now joins Trade Ambassador Jameson Greer in declaring that this administration's policy is a Hamiltonian policy, and it is the foundation of our economic sovereignty. And let's not forget who Alexander Hamilton and the infant American Republic were fighting. Not Chinese communists. They were fighting King George, the Bank of England, and the British East India Company. The same imperial free trade system that now in its 21st century globalist form that the Chamber of Commerce and the Cato Institute are defending. Now, as far as the Supreme Court's decision nullifying IEEPA as a vehicle for imposing tariffs, the President and Bessent made clear that the authority exists through many other provisions and there will be no letup in the administration's defense of American industry and workers. Yesterday, the President moved quickly to sign a new 10% global tariff using other laws, and Bessent said that the tariff revenue in 2026 will be virtually unchanged. Now, when Donald Trump introduced his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to the Board of Peace, he used a line that deserves far more attention than it got.
And I said, Steve, how would you like to be Henry Kissinger Jr. that doesn't leak? And he said, are you a leaker, Steve? No, he didn't even know what the word meant, and it's true. I always say Henry Kissinger, who was one of the great leakers of all time, by the way, Richard Nixon said to him, Henry, who's leaking all this stuff? I don't know, Mr. President, it was Henry.
That's not a joke. That is a very precisely directed statement. And you can bet that many of the people sitting in that room understood the role that Kissinger had played in the last century in the empire's policy of perpetual war. Henry Kissinger was one of the architects of the post-war order that Trump is now dismantling. And if you want to know who Kissinger was leaking to, just look at his infamous speech to London's Chatham House in 1982, when he said, I kept the British Foreign Office better informed and more closely engaged than I did the American State Department. On the empire's behalf, Kissinger didn't manage peace, he managed conflict, keeping nations locked in permanent tensions and permanent negotiation. That was the system, that was the point. Trump didn't just pick Steve Witkoff because he isn't a leaker. He picked him because this administration's policy is the polar opposite of Kissinger's and the empire's. And Marco Rubio made clear that President Trump has thrown out that old rule book because the imperial system doesn't just tolerate perpetual conflict, it requires it. It was designed to keep the imperial or globalist system in place, which is why it never took up the challenge of real economic development for the region. It was always happy to let everyone fight forever and just extract the oil. The president of Kazakhstan put the alternative in the simplest possible terms.
It's about making durable peace through practical, target-oriented measures, but not through endless conferences with wishful resolutions. The world has never seen a move like this. It is absolutely unprecedented because, in essence, peace through construction is a very innovative concept.
Peace through construction. Not peace through managed negotiation that never resolves anything, but construction. And economic growth, which is the only durable basis for peace. And here's what it looks like in practice. This is what was announced on Thursday. $7 billion already committed from Gulf and Central Asian nations. The United States pledging $10 billion, which is only 2 weeks of what a war costs, as the president put it. 100,000 homes in Rafah as a starting point, a Palestinian police force with 2,000 applicants on its first day of recruiting. This isn't some hollow framework. This is an up-and-running operation. But perhaps the most powerful voice in that room came from the youngest head of state present, the president of Paraguay.
I think that of the many things that you have achieved in the last 12 months as president of the U.S., I think the greatest thing, and I'm probably the youngest head of state here, is hope, President. We have lost hope about solving problems for many, many decades. A system that was broken, a system that was not able to bring solutions. Now we're seeing that thanks from your leadership, we are solving the issues.
A broken system that couldn't produce solutions.
And this is the system that Carney loves because they profit off of it. Now, previous episodes, if you're a new viewer, I exposed this. The damages that have been done from Brookfield and Carney around the world to other nations, truly inhumane, let alone the exact opposite of what a real environmentalist would do. They don't care. It's all a charade to make money. That is the military-industrial complex. That is the global elite. The liberals who voted again for the same party that has destroyed our nation need to understand this. Most of them would, if you said, John, JFK, they'd all be, They're not seeing this is just another JFK. He just tackles it completely different because he has to. Because the politicians around him are so corrupted. That's what happened to JFK. Do you not think there were politicians that were involved? And like the whole Henry Kissinger. Do people actually realize that he was literally feeding firsthand confidential information out of the White House in order for the global elite to have access to this, to make money, to destroy nations, and in the end, bring down a president? Trump has to be incredibly careful on how he's dealing with this. That's why the very first thing he did was put in, and now he learned off his first term, that in order for you to do what you need, you have to remove all of the corruption. And if it comes up and he's running, guess what? I ain't protecting you. You will fall. You will be, like she says, a chess piece who will be pushed off the table. This is what needs to be done. Thus why you have Kash Patel, Pete Hegseth. All of these amazing politicians, including Democrats. Tulsi, she's fabulous. Her own party completely they tried everything to destroy her. Why? Because she was onto what the Democratic Party had become. She was witnessing it firsthand. And our media will never tell you this. They do not want you to know this.
Now, as Canadians, we must ask why the Prime Minister would be willing to break from Canadian policy to this point and potentially send Canadians to war to die. Now, we must look past the emotionally charged political rhetoric and examine the Prime Minister's personal interest in the matter. Now, Prime Minister Mark Carney's former company, Brookfield, where he holds millions of dollars in stock, is set to benefit enormously from the reconstruction of Ukraine. Perhaps this explains why Conflict Carney won't rule out putting Canadian troops on the ground in Ukraine. Perhaps he needs to protect the assets of himself and his friends at Brookfield. Now, in 2023, Brookfield acquired a company called Westinghouse alongside Cameco. Westinghouse is involved in manufacturing nuclear reactors and has been helping Ukraine decouple from Russia by working to make nuclear fuel bundles that are compatible with Ukraine's Soviet-era reactors. Now, not only is the company working with Ukraine to decouple from Russian nuclear fuel, but the company has also struck a deal with Ukraine to build 9 AP1000 nuclear reactors. And according to Cameco, the cost to construct such a reactor, based on MIT estimates, is in the range of $6 to $8 billion per reactor. However, it says the price can vary significantly depending on the country's labor and construction rates. Labor and construction productivity rates, rather. That being said, even with an extremely conservative estimate of $4 billion per reactor in Ukraine, Brookfield would have at least $36 billion worth of investments in the country. This isn't the only investment that Brookfield has in the war-torn nation either. Brookfield is also the biggest investor in a $160 million IT park located in Lviv. Now here's where things get even more interesting. Brookfield was approached by an organization known as Advantage Ukraine, which was created by the Ukrainian government to seek out investors to help rebuild the country, essentially. Now, reading from the LinkedIn post itself. Today, the Advantage Ukraine team met with Brookfield to present the current investment opportunities and business climate in Ukraine to the company. They discussed key sectors of the economy that could be potentially attractive for investment and also explored the issue of the country's reconstruction. So, not only is Brookfield invested in Ukraine through their acquisition of Westinghouse, where they're set to build 9 nuclear reactors, Brookfield was specifically approached by the Ukrainian government's Advantage Ukraine organization that is actively seeking investment in the country. Now, it seems that Brookfield has a man on the inside of Canada's highest political office, the Prime Minister's former company, where he holds millions of dollars in stock and undoubtedly where he has formed many friendships, has billions of dollars to be made in Ukraine. And perhaps this explains why Mark Carney is open to the idea of deploying Canadian troops. Certainly the question of this Prime Minister's motivations around this needs to be examined in this light. And I would add, the mainstream media needs to do their job here. This is not hard information to find.
It's not. And this is Diverge Media. He's an independent like myself. His name is Greg Staley. Great job, Greg. The links are all below. Every single thing I show you, every document, everything is in the links below. And I urge you, especially to the Prometheus and a couple of these others that I'm doing, click on the link, watch it in its entirety. It is truly eye-opening. And mainstream refuses to talk about it. Now, the Kissinger part, the reason that he brought that up, and this is incredibly important, is that he knows that in a lot of countries, most countries, especially the ones that have been really part of this global cabal, this world order, leak information to their buddies within corporations, within the military industry. It's this back and forth that nobody really knows. Well, we're seeing a lot of that through the Epstein releases. There's piles of people that are embedded in these countries. Canada is one of the worst, especially since the Liberals have been in power for over a decade. Every aspect of your everyday life is controlled by these green zealots and their ideology. The courts, the police, the borders, every aspect. The Senate is one of the worst. Trump knows this. So he brought out Kissinger, and he points to Kissinger as often as possible to try to get people to understand the person in the room beside the politician, or the politician that you voted for, they're the enemy. They are part of the global new world order, which is just a new name for the industrial military complex. And we have the worst. And again, this goes to Ukraine.
One would assume that she knows basically every state secret in Canada. She is one of the most senior political figures in Canadian life for the last 10 years. You have to assume she knows just like everything. Everything, what's in all the closets, all the secrets. That's a little bit of a concern. She is, after all, an employee of a government that's at war, a war for its very existence with a rather powerful country.
He's talking about Christopher
Well,
Freeland.
one thing the Liberals are good at is keeping secrets. They've kept secrets from the Canadian public forever. They don't release any documents, so maybe the Russians would have a better chance of getting information. But here's another piece from Terry Newman there, saying, this is Carney saying that we should stand with Ukraine, and then we're going to stand with China, who stands with Russia. But Terry's saying we should stand with Ukraine, but it's not clear we should stand with Zelensky due to his attempt to squash anti-corruption agencies investigating his friends, which he had to reverse. And what's with BlackRock and Brookfield reconstructing Ukraine? Again, this is this is the conflicts that are all over the place. Brookfield has huge, huge tentacles everywhere. Everywhere. And we're going to have Stephen Bonkin tomorrow. He's going to talk a little bit about Brookfield's tentacles. If Mark Carney, just a shred of fiscal responsibility, would divest of the options and shares of Brookfield while he's Prime Minister, because it just puts him in a bad light, even the perception of a bad light. Because here he is in promising Canadian money, and Brookfield benefits from it. He gave $500 million to the European Space Agency, and Brookfield tied to that one. There's so many ties everywhere. He's going to China, where Brookfield borrowed money from China. That's a bad person to borrow money from. You know what I mean? And then the big thing that Mark Carney is going to push here, it's going to come here right away. It's this thing that's basically dead everywhere in the world now, except for Canada. And they just want to highlight this. This is Brookfield again, the ties in there. We are the world's largest private investor in energy transition. That's CCUS, right? So here's Brookfield, that's the largest investor in CCUS. And what's Mark Carney going to be pushing here in Canada? And the options, if anybody doesn't understand how options work, so he doesn't really even pay for those options. So when he was working for Brookfield, he would have got options at X price. Say the stock was, I'm just going to use a number, $20. And his options are, say, a 10-year, 5-year option or whatever it is. Whatever the difference in that, the shares, he gets that when he cashes those options in. But he never paid a dime for those options either. So that's how options work. So Mark Carney is obviously, his wealth will be tied to how much Brookfield can move its share price up. And if you're, helping get contracts and different things, and to say it's in a blind trust when you obviously know what's in the blind trust, it's not very blind. And Scott Bessent said it best, the Treasury Secretary in the United States of America, there is no such thing as a blind trust. He had to sell all his shares when he took on that role.
All of that investments that he has tied in, like they said, he didn't have to buy them. He earned them through his own deviant methods of making that corporation money, which again, previous episodes, I think it was only 2 episodes ago where I did a full collage of pretty much them getting busted. Brookfield is one of the worst in Canada, if not the worst at tax evasion. And when you've got a corporation whose tentacles are that long and go into so many different countries, you can't even track all of the money, the laundering, the political interference, the obstruction, just everything that they're part of. I mean, it's hilarious that people will sit back and watch a movie and be like, oh, that's evil, yeah, go, 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 and they cheer for the good guy, but when it's happening in real time in front of them, they don't see it. They don't see it. It's Canada, the propaganda power that is occurring in Canada. You cannot believe anything that comes out of legacy media. That includes the radio, because it's all CRTC regulated. This is why you need to support independent media. Like, share, and subscribe. And like I said, I post, check them out. If you like them, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to them. These guys put out great content. And they're not paid for by the government or any political party. Well, you guys, I'm going to call that the end to this. But I'm going to, on the next episode, just do a continuation. So it'll be kind of like a part 2, where I actually show you what the greatest economists on the planet are talking about. And every single one of them are pointing out Canada, because everybody knows the military-industrial complex and its ties to the global cabal, the New World Order. And all of them are pointing to the same thing. Canada is being sacrificed for the benefit of the global cabal. And by the way, I had to kind of change this little ending here at the end because I got a phone call while I was doing my editing, and Buddy's like, hey, remember we were talking yesterday and you were like building this file while we were talking, and a buddy was talking about this clip and he sent it to me, and it's this guy called Moose on the Loose. He did this thing, man. It's all about like Kiev and Ukraine and Brookfield, and so he sent me the link. I went over it. Great job. It's a shorter clip. He dabbles on everything that I've been talking about for a year and a half. He puts it all, and it's all strictly just kind of the Brookfield, Freeland, the whole fabulous. Check him out. This stuff needs to get out. People need to see this. We are so just... There is nowhere you can go in Canada without being brainwashed by propaganda. You need to like, share, and subscribe to independent media. It's crucial. If we ever plan to try to save any remnant left of civilization across the world, we got to end the global cabal and their propaganda. Until next time, you guys, I'm Alias to Guy, Canadian Citizen Journal. Stay informed.